President Biden raising eyebrows after dodging dinner with NATO leaders last night, citing a heavy workload.
I bet he had a big breakfast then. And that's not the only event he's skipping. The DNC still not scheduling any debates against his Democratic challengers, including our next guest.
He really doesn't have much of a campaign yet. Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson joins us now. Marianne, great to see you on the couch.
Good
morning.
Thank you for
having me.
Your reaction to the president saying, I'm going to bail on dinner last night when you meet with allies?
Well, this is a pretty important meeting. This is NATO. He's meeting with Zelensky. So if the president says, I have work to do and I want to work with my team on my speech, I don't fault him for that.
You know, one of the things that's going on right now, there's some bipartisan criticism that the administration is going to give Ukraine cluster bombs, which are outlawed in 120 different nations, except the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. What do you think about that?
I think cluster bombs should not be used. There's a reason for the Geneva Convention, for these international laws. These are bombs which could hurt innocent children, civilians for years to come.
Because they don't all detonate at once.
Pardon?
They don't all detonate.
Absolutely. And they can have terrible, terrible repercussions even after a war is over. They should not be used.
Tell us a little bit about you, your policy, why you want to run for president, and put yourself and your family through that. We see what happens to Donald Trump, and you're running against the current president.
There are many aspects of it that are unpleasant. There's no doubt about it. But there are other aspects about it that are exhilarating. And the exhilarating part is talking to the people of the United States. I don't think the people are the problem in this country. I think we need to remember that. I think there's a political system that often does more to thwart and to suppress the voice of the people than to facilitate the voice of the people. And that's the problem we have. I believe that we have too many legislators who, when push comes to shove, do the bidding of their own corporate donors and billionaire donors than to actually serve the health and safety and well-being of their own constituents. Even when poll after poll after poll shows what their constituents want, too many legislators go against that because of what their donors want.
So let's take a look at the polls right now. And the sitting president's got 64% right now. He's not really campaigning much. RFK Jr. got in, isn't really welcomed on many left-wing outlets. He's got 17%, and you have 10%. How do you expect to close the gap when the president will not engage with you?
Well, it's difficult, of course, and I think many people think that the president should engage. You have a majority of Democratic voters and Democratic-leaning voters who do want to see a debate and do want to see their options. This, to me, is about our democracy. You know, Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power is in the hands of the people. The people of the United States, particularly at a time like this, should be very aware of their options, and that's what a candidacy is. I see a campaign as a long job interview, and the voters are deciding, who am I going to hire for this job? And the president should debate his opponents. He absolutely should.
And it's a job where only one person gets the job, and you want it. Joe Biden says he is absolutely fit to be president of the United States when it comes to his age and mental acuity and things like that. Do you think so?
Well, you know, for me, even if he was at the top of his game, I think I'm a better candidate. Even if he was at the top of his game, I think I have better policies, I have a better agenda for the next 4 years, and I think I'm a better person to face the Republicans in 2024.
So do you think he's too old?
You know, I don't want to get ageist about it. You know, we all know this because, look, Trump is, 2 years younger, I think. Every person has to look at that and choose for themselves. We've all seen the gaffes. And also, his team says, well, when it comes to decision-making, he does fine. I feel that I have plenty to challenge the president on based on serious fundamental disagreements on policy. I don't need to go there.
Marianne, if anybody's watching, they'd like more information or to donate, what's your website?
Thank you. Marianne2024.com.
All right, Marianne. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.